Welcome back to People First, the Young Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan. It's so lovely to have you with us again today. For this episode, I'm joined by Sinead Randall, Operations Lead at Brook Street. Today, we're going to unpack the art of the job interview, which for most people can be an extremely anxiety-inducing situation. Sinead is here to give us some top tips on how you can put your best foot forward for a great interview. And we're going to unpack some do's and don'ts for the day. Welcome to the podcast, Sinead.
Thank you.
I am so happy that it's you here with me today. How would you say we know each other before the podcast?
So we've known each other for about 2 years now. So I am in recruitment. So you have supported me throughout that. You've given me lots of hints and tips along the way about marketing. And yeah, we've kind of shared ideas and worked together quite well, I believe, in the past.
And I would say so too. And Sinead was my first stakeholder whenever I took on the Brook Street account, and we worked together mainly in the contact centre recruitment space. A little bit of sales we did, a little bit of sort of collections and things like that. But I think you're the perfect person to be here talking to me about the art of the interview.
Thank you so much.
So bringing it back then, or bringing it right back, something that we always ask the listeners is, what was your very first job? Not your first payroll job. I mean, like, talk to me about the paper rounds or do you know what I'm trying to say?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, for me, my first job, I was probably only about 13 or 14 in a greasy spoon pot washing.
Yeah.
So my older sister worked there as a waitress. She went, "Oh, come down." So yeah, I was a Sunday girl, up to my elbows in greasy water,
That
gravy
sounds
pans.
gorgeous.
Absolutely. I'm a few years later on from that now, but yeah, I've done many weird and wonderful jobs over the years, and it's made me who I am today.
Yeah.
It means I can adapt to different environments, and I've picked up a few tips across the way.
It's all edgy here. And I suppose we spoke a lot. We both came out of hospitality to get into
Absolutely.
recruitment. So there's loads of sort of nuances from that and things that we take into recruitment. But thinking back to when you were pot washing, can you remember having an interview for that job?
Oh no, that was definitely just a turn up, give it a go.
Put on some rubber gloves.
Yeah, put on some rubber gloves, give it a go, and if you're still here a few hours later and you were willing to turn up the next week, you had the job.
Yeah. So can you think about when your first proper interview was that was two people on the other side of a desk and it was in that formal setting?
I'd probably say my first properly corporate interview wouldn't have been until I was about 30.
Okay.
Before that, it had kind of been group assessments, turn up, quite a few people sitting there. You know, how willing are you to get up in front of other people and have a conversation?
Yeah.
But yeah, it probably would have been when I was 30 or so. You know, I'd already had a child by then, and that was the first time I'd had a more corporate interview, one-on-one, behind a desk, asked about my key skills and examples and things like that.
Given the STAR technique.
Absolutely.
Well, funny you mentioned those group assessment days. I remember being probably no older than 16, 17, going to Asda, I think it was, as the Christmas temp, and they asked us to make a car out of spaghetti hoops, marshmallows, and like some other like indescript items. And I remember thinking, like, what is this? Like, what do they really want us to do here in this thing? But thinking back, it was all about the selling. It was all about the problem solving. They want to know that you're just up for it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that as much as when you're going for an interview, the things they're asking to do might seem really bizarre, but the thing is, they're asking that for a reason. There's
a method to the madness.
Absolutely. So whether or not they're saying, "Oh, sell this pen to me," or they're saying, "Oh, randomly, I want you to get this word into a conversation," it's because if you're going for a certain job, you might have to cope with the unexpected.
Yeah.
And if they throw something unexpected at you, they need to see, do you fall apart? Can you adapt? Can you go, a little bit bizarre, but we'll give it our best go? Yeah. Those are the skills they're looking for. And as much as it might seem a little bit mad, there is method to the madness.
And what do you think it is about job interviews specifically? Because you mentioned they can be quite frightening. What do you think is the reason that they are or can be seen so scary?
For me, it is ultimately somebody is judging you.
Yeah.
You're putting yourself out there for somebody to say, "I like this person," or "I'm not." You're
Yeah.
putting yourself out there, which is always scary, no matter what you're doing, whether it's dating or, a job interview. That's you putting yourself out there for somebody else to say, I like you or I don't.
Yeah, and we often describe recruitment as like a matchmaking sort of
It
process, isn't it? So you can sort of say that the interview is almost like your first date.
It really is. And it's got to remember that, like you would on a first date, it's a two-way thing. If you find out about what they're expecting from you from an interview beforehand and you go, no, I don't feel comfortable with this, then there's a good chance that you wouldn't feel comfortable in that type of role either. Like on a date, you'd be looking for red flags, things that you're not sure about. It's the same for a job interview. You've got to be interviewing them the same way they're interviewing you.
So, for example, if you're going, let's think about our clients, if you're going for a sales role in a contact center and you struggle to sell that pen or struggle to speak to someone, that is something that the interviewer is going to be looking at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between, having a few nerves and fundamentally going, I don't feel comfortable doing this.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And using that example then, I am Jordan. I am going for my first interview. I'm going to do it in a contact center and I think I'm going to be in a sales role. It's going to be outbound.
Yeah.
How would you advise me to prepare for my interview, or what steps do you think I should take in the run up to that interview?
Couple of key things. Before the interview, whether you're going direct or going through a recruitment company, find out as much as you can about what's going to be expected you from the process. How long is it going to be? Is it made up of a few elements? Is it going to be a one-to-one interview or a group scenario? When you know that information, you can move on to the next step. With the wonders of modern technology, you can literally type in to AI, what interview questions could I expect at this type of job interview? And they can give you some suggestions. When you know roughly what kind of questions you're going to be asked about, you can then identify what skills you're going to need to display. Make a few notes. What skills have I got? When have I exhibited those skills? I always find it's important to have a few notes, but make sure you don't write out your full interview answers. There's nothing worse than standing there with a piece of paper, reading something out, because it doesn't come across as genuine.
Yeah. And I've been guilty of that before, almost being over-prepared. You really want to try your best to impress, I guess, but you want it to seem genuine and authentic.
100%, yeah. So I think, find out what skills, jot a few notes down, think about some really specific examples of when you've done that. It doesn't necessarily mean when you're talking through an example that it needs to be in the same type of job. Everyone's always got to have a first job, a first step into a new career path.
Yeah.
And if you've made it to that interview, clearly someone's seen those qualities and they think that you've got the transferable skills.
Sure.
So just think about those transferable skills that you can show. Think about examples when you've gone above and beyond, or, really helped out a customer, and tell them about that one particular customer. Throw in a name, throw in a random association you've got. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Tell the interviewer how you made them feel. And I feel like those are perfect examples of sort of things to get up at. Something I like to do, and I know you'll agree with this, is I know that maybe, if I go back to maybe after graduating uni, I wasn't the most academic and in some instances, and maybe my grades wouldn't stand up against someone else, but I knew that my personality would carry me through an interview, and I knew that I would interview well because I knew how to make myself seem necessary to the business. So something I always just like to do was look up, if I knew who the interview panel was, I would look them up on LinkedIn and I would find something on their profile that I felt that I could relate to.
Yeah.
So did you play hockey in school, for example, or maybe you were a member of this organisation before, or maybe you went to this university? How, if I'm stuck for conversation, can I make sure that they know that I'm a nice person?
Yeah.
And I found that that's got me through quite well as well. But going back even a bit further, when we're applying for jobs, the first point of contact or the first visual of us that they see is either a LinkedIn profile or typically a CV. What steps can we take at CV submission stage that would hopefully ensure that we could maybe put ourselves forward to likely get an interview? Or is there anything that we can do that early on? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Key things for me with CVs is be honest. Don't talk things up. Don't say you were doing certain roles, responsibilities that you won't have, you will always be found out.
Yeah.
You'll be questioned on something, and that puts you in a really awkward situation.
And do you have, like, what would an example, obviously I'm not expecting to name names or anything, but do you have an example of something like that? Or is there anything that's happened while you've been, you know, working in your job that you find the candidate just hasn't stood up to what they've said they have?
Oh, I find it all the time. People, exaggerate dates.
Right, okay.
It's one of those, you are going to be referenced. No company is going to offer a job without some form of referencing.
Okay.
So if you say that you worked somewhere between specific dates, yes, people are going to be forgiving if you're a little bit out. But if you say that you were there for a year and you were actually there for 2 months, someone is going to find out.
Yeah.
And that immediately gets you off on the wrong foot. It questions your integrity, your honesty. And yes, it might have been an innocent mistake, but make sure before you're sending over a CV that you're double checking all these things.
Just be diligent in it.
Absolutely.
Because you will be pulled up on it.
Yeah.
And so we've sent in our CV, the recruitment consultant or the company has screened it directly, and we're called up for the interview, which is great. From the moment we get that interview offer or the invite to the interview, what should we be doing then? How should we be preparing? Is there any good practices that we should remember for the day of the interview?
Think about the whole process. You know, how are you going to get there on the day? Is it a Teams interview? Make sure that you're all set up. You've got the IT skills, you've got the invites and things like that. If it's in person, make sure you know where you're going.
Yeah.
Make sure you give yourself enough time to arrive. If you are using public transport or need to park somewhere unknown, research it in advance, because the last thing you want to be doing before an interview is start panicking. Oh, I'm stuck in traffic. Oh, I don't know where to park. Because that's going to start off when you're worried, you're panicked, and you're not going to perform at your best.
Sure. On the day or in the interview, you know, how should we act personally? Should we be shaking hands? You know, should we be dressed formally? How should we turn up prepared on a personal note?
I think in terms of that, you've got to bear in mind what kind of interview it is. If you're going for a corporate office job where you know that the dress code on a day-to-day basis is going to be smart, you know, shirt, trousers, smart, go dress that way. If you're unsure, it is much better to be overdressed than underdressed.
Underdressed, yeah.
If you don't know if it's okay to wear jeans, put the trousers on.
Yeah.
If you don't know if it's okay to wear trainers, put the shoes on. Not saying you have to dress up that isn't you. You know, if you've got purple hair, don't dye your hair brown for an interview. You've got to attend as yourself.
Yeah.
But it needs to be a smart version of yourself.
And for listeners, if anyone is wondering how they can find out how a team maybe dresses to work or what that sort of dress code is, we can always check out like the career site, for example, of that business, or look at their social media, like see what people do, wear to work, and try and match that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can look people up on social media. You can ask it. Whoever's booked in your interview, they're not going to be annoyed.
They're not going to judge you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They would much rather.
They want to do well.
That's going to show you in a really good light, because it shows that you're preparing. You're giving it some thought. You're not just, I'll just turn up in what I'm wearing.
Yeah.
You're planning ahead, and it shows that you care and you're putting in some effort. So no, whoever books you in for the interview should be able to pass on this kind of information about what the dress code is.
Yeah, and something I have said multiple times on this podcast, and it's something that our brand leader, Lee Passingham, has said, is you wouldn't turn up to a driving test without having worked with a driving instructor. You wouldn't turn up to court without working with a solicitor. So we encourage you to work with a recruiter when you're in the job seeking process, because our recruiter, like ourselves, will help you. They'll have these nuggets of information. We will have done the research on your behalf. If they want you to turn up in a gorgeous 3-piece suit, we can tell you that information. And then we are that middleman. 9 times out of 10, if you're working with a recruiter too, you have seen that recruiter has seen other candidates through that process.
Precisely.
They know what that winning interview is like, for example. And that's something I'm sure you and your team do. I know you guys on,
We do, yeah. It's one of those, it's much better to ask those questions prior. You don't want to turn up in your jeans and go, I should have dressed up. It's too late.
Yeah.
But you've got those opportunities. Even on the morning, if you want to be ringing somebody up and go, is this okay? That's what recruiters are there. We're there to help you through this process.
And in your own words, or from your own perspective, what is, and this is very general, what is the interviewer looking for? What are they trying to see from you in that moment?
They're trying to see, are you going to fit in their business? And can you do what they're asking of you? It doesn't mean have you done it previously. It means can you do it going forward?
Yeah.
And are you going to fit the company ethos? It is a big thing that people are looking for today. They're looking for that culture. They're looking for work-life balance. However that looks to you, however that looks to the employer, you want to know that you're on the same page.
Yeah.
So you just need to make sure, like we were saying before, dating, it's got to work both ways. You've got to fit in that company and that company's got to fit with you. And that's all an interview is. It's just about seeing, is this going to work for both of us?
Sure. And we've submitted our CV, we've got the interview, we're really, really happy about it. But then we start to have that little bit of self-doubt, or maybe that little bit of imposter syndrome, or maybe, for example, we've been made redundant, or we've been let go from a company and we're feeling a bit fragile, you know? Or maybe that this is a job that we really, really want, it's our dream role. How can we calm those sort of pre-interview nerves? And also, what can we do after the interview?
Pre-interview nerves is natural. For me, I like nerves because it shows I care. You know, I felt nervous coming along and doing this podcast today, and we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
So those nerves, you've just got to challenge them. You've got to kind of embrace them and go, no, I want this. That's why I feel nervous. So I'm going to channel that. I'm going to make sure I've done my research. I know what I'm going into. And I'm going to show that interviewer how much I want this. But, you know, ask for a glass of water. If you need to take a pause, if your brain has gone to mush, you know, take a sip of water, ask the interviewer to repeat the question. Even if you're halfway through a question and you go, I am going off on a completely different tangent, waffling, I can't even remember what the point was at the start of this. Take that pause, have a glass of water, say, are you okay to repeat the question?
Yeah, I like that. And something I would have, I mean, don't know if I'm the right person to give advice, but I feel like I've always had successful interviews. But something I always like to do after the interview is thank the people that I've spoken to as well, connect with them on LinkedIn, let them know that I actually am a nice person again, you know. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. Sometimes it's nice even to just open doors to people in the industry. So always, I'm a firm believer in send that thank you note, you know. Is that, would you agree? Or
yeah, it's one of those where it's not always necessary, but it is a nice touch, whether that's to the recruitment company or the interviewer direct, because it's not always, you don't always have that clear line to the exact person who interviewed you, but there is always someone you can reach out to and thank. And again, it just shows how much thought and attention you've paid into it.
Yeah. I began my career in recruitment marketing in a small agency in Belfast, and we sent a number of candidates to a Magic Circle law firm. So, you know, like how tight they can be around like doing testing, you know, they've got company-based interviews and then you're doing an exam and things like that. When it came out of the 4 candidates that were there, 3 of them were way overqualified or way more qualified, than the 4th.
Yeah.
But the 4th person got the interview because he said hello to the receptionist on the way in. He thanked everyone on the way out. He spoke to the cleaner. He made sure that he was kind to everyone in the lift. And that's the kind of thing that businesses remember. That's those softer skills. So don't take, what I would say my messages in interviews is don't underestimate the power of being a nice person or being a decent person. Don't expect, you know, don't be entitled that you're going to get this job or that you deserve it more than anyone else, because a lot of the time there could always just be a better candidate, you know, and that's all. In the interview, is there any buzzwords that we should be dropping in? Is there anything you like to hear whenever you're interviewing? What sort of things can we say that can really set us ahead? Or set us apart, I guess.
Yeah, I think researching the company before you turn up, you know, work out what's important to you. So whether or not it's their stance on cultural matters, if they do work with charity, show that you've looked into that.
Yeah.
Mention that as part of the interview process, or even just conversation either side.
Yeah.
You know, show that you've looked into this. That's something that really appeals.
Yeah, look like their chosen charity, for example.
Exactly.
And that could be a cause that you support too. That's a really, really good idea, actually.
Yeah, and don't pretend that you care about these things either. Because if you go in and go, honestly, I've never had anything to do with this before, but it sounds really intriguing. I want to know more. You can then ask the interviewers about it. What do they know about this process, this scheme they've got running? And it might be, they could say, oh, it's not something I'm involved with, but, you know, if you're successful, you can then link in with these other people, and it will already show that you're seeing yourself as part of their culture, their community.
Yeah.
It's also important for me to be asking those interviewers some questions. And it doesn't necessarily need to be things about the hours or the dress code when you work in there. It could be, why do you like working here?
Yeah.
Ask the interviewer how long they've been with the company. Why have you stayed so long? What's your journey been?
Yeah.
Did you come in at this position or have you worked your way up? Find out about the interviewer. Like you were saying, it's that friendly, approachable thing.
Yeah.
That it sounds like urban legends when people go, oh, I got this job because I tidied my cup up after myself. But I've met receptionists in offices and they know everything, and they will have that direct line through to the hiring managers, the director of the company. And if you were rude, if you were dismissive, you can guarantee that receptionist will be passing on that information, because you don't want to then represent that company if you're not that friendly, approachable person.
I cannot. I've actually nearly had a shiver up my spine. I cannot express how important it is to get friendly with office managers, with receptionists. This isn't just in terms of this interview podcast. Yeah. They are the backbone of every business.
Absolutely.
Claire that sits in our reception, I would never, and don't use it either, get on her bad side, because she's the one that if something goes wrong that you turn to, she knows everything, that sort of way. So shout out Claire in Canary Wharf. But yeah, that's something I'm really, really passionate about, is that you need to make those like personable relationships with absolutely everybody that works in the company.
Definitely. And you never know when you might need that connection. It might be something basic as, which way is it to the bus station from here?
Yeah.
It could be do you know who this person is? I spotted them on the door. They look really familiar, but can't remember their name.
Yeah.
You never know when you might need these connections.
No, you're right. I completely agree. Do you think that we sometimes undersell or oversell ourselves in interviews? And do you have any advice to stay true in the middle?
I think people are probably guilty of doing both.
Yeah.
And it is going to be difficult to sell yourself, but without going too far.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've just got to be realistic about what your role is in things. And if you're talking about something that you've done as part of a team, talk about what the team did, but also highlight your part in that. Don't talk about, when we did this and when we did that. The interviewer's not interviewing the whole team, they're interviewing you. So they want to know what part you played.
Yeah.
I also think in terms of overselling yourself, when you're going through the STAR technique and you're talking about, the situation, the task, the action and the result, it's always good to kind of reflect on that as well and kind of go, if I was to be in that situation again, I would have done certain things differently. Yeah. Talk about what you learned. And that does show that humility.
I love that. That's a really good piece of advice. Reflect on it.
Yeah. Don't just stop at that end result. If you were in the exact same scenario, would you do it again? I very much doubt anybody in life will ever say, no, that interaction was absolutely perfect. I couldn't have done anything differently. That time to reflect, it will not only impress the interviewer that you've taken that, but it will also help you in your future life as well, because these scenarios might come up again, and that way you can go, oh, well, I thought about that in detail for that interview, but now I can use that going forward. A lot of transactions you do, you're in the moment, you do it. How much do we ever kind of think back about, oh, could I have done that differently?
Yeah.
And that really does help you grow.
I think that's a really, really, really good point and a really good piece of advice to put in that reflection. And something you mentioned, I don't really think we've touched on it, is techniques. So we've spoken about the STAR technique, which I'm sure everyone has heard of.
Yep.
In your own words, and if you're explaining it to someone who is completely unaware, what is the STAR technique? Okay,
so the STAR technique, it's used for competency-based interviews. So a competency-based interview is basically an interviewer will ask you about a skill and then ask you for an example of a time when you've done it. So with STAR, it's situation. So where you were working. Then it's the task. So what you had to achieve. Yeah. The actions, so the steps that you took. And then the result, so how that ended. And as I've mentioned, it's always good as an additional step if you can add on your learnings, your reflections as well. So it's all about telling a story, painting that picture, adding in those additional details. If you can remember names, or, I remember it was a really busy Saturday afternoon when this customer came in. It's really showing that picture. Because whilst you're doing that, you're going to be displaying skills, not only that you're trying to, but also additional skills.
Yeah.
So it's going to show how much you can retain information. It's going to be showing that you can outline those details. It's really displaying you at your best.
Yeah.
Plus, it's clear that it's not going to be generic. It's not going to be a, oh, yes, I do that all the time. You know, you're actually telling about one particular time you did it and exactly how you did it. There's no way you're going to be able to get that kind of detail off a computer-generated, how do I answer this question in an interview? And again, if you feel you're going off on track on your little story, it's fine. You just ask the interviewer to bring you back on point.
Reset.
Exactly.
Reset. Another thing you can do, and this has gone the extra mile, if you can match one of your answers to one of their values, that's really good. So if, you know, for example, if one of their values is transparency, you can talk about a time that you were transparent. Or, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Definitely.
I think that's something really, really good to do. And we've talked about the STAR technique, but is there any sort of way that we should structure our script, our answers, other than STAR? Or is it just a matter of being prepared, knowing your situation, know your task, etc., etc.?
So outside of the STAR technique, which I do think really works for people, myself as well as other candidates I've advised, but it's also about looking up certain terminology that goes along with a job. If you're going, for example, for a call centre job, you might get asked about targets or AHT, CSAT. And before I started working in this world, I didn't know what those little nuggets meant.
Yeah.
But you look them up, so you will know that CSAT is customer satisfaction. And that way, if somebody mentions that, you can confidently answer. You can throw that in, because although you may not have worked in that environment, I'm pretty certain that a lot of people will have dealt with customers if going forward for this type of role, and they would have had feedback from that.
Yeah, and they can describe.
Exactly. It might be somebody saying at the end of the night, oh, that's been brilliant, here's a tip. It could be a TripAdvisor review. It could be, you know, if you're in a shop, someone really thanking you for their support. We will all have had customer satisfaction reviews.
Of course,
it just
100%.
might not have been on a formal ticking sheet, but you will have those skills. That's how you got the interview.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And you are segueing really nicely onto my next question. So what if I am applying for a job that I don't technically have the right skills for or meet all the criteria? Sorry, I should say experience rather than skills. If I'm applying for a job that I don't technically have the relevant experience or the right amount of experience before, how can I showcase my skills and that I could be the right fit?
I think with things like that, you've got to be realistic. You have to enter into it going, I know I'm not the perfect jigsaw match, but you can mold me. It's one of those, a lot of places will look for the potential.
Yeah.
They might have candidates who are coming from the exact same role that might have bad habits. They might have done things a certain way that could find it difficult to transform into a new company's way. So you can show, I'm moldable. I've got the skills you're looking for, but they haven't been honed. You know, I'm eager, I'm willing to learn. If you put the time in me, I will be invested in you. And it's really that showing that you want to build a career with them. You want to be with them long term. You've got the core skills. So let's work together. Let's get me where you want me to be using the basic skills I've got.
I love that. I love that. And sometimes your mind just goes blank in the interviews.
Absolutely.
You know, these things happen. How can we pull it back if something like this does occur?
For me, I like the honesty of it. And that's my personality.
Yeah.
If I start saying a sentence and it goes away with me, or I fumble a word, I might just go, there.
Yeah.
Let's start that again, shall we?
Yeah, of course.
And that's my way. I will openly admit that I've gone completely off tangent.
Sinead, I presented to you umpteen times and went off tangent. It doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking
Precisely.
about. Sometimes you just lose your rhythm, or if you're, and this is something that we can go back to later, but, you know, if you're interviewing virtually, maybe you've got an email come through and that's thrown you off, or those sorts of things. So these things can happen no matter how prepared we are. But what would you say is the best way that we can pull it back in or rein it back?
For me, honesty in the moment, and go, my apologies, this has happened. I lost my trail of thought. Let's pick this back up. Can you tell me the question again?
Yeah.
I know I was making this point. You know, if you're interviewing from home, the doorbell might ring.
Yeah.
You know, I remember during the COVID years, I might be sat an interviewing a candidate, and my 3-year-old daughter will toddle in, and I'm just kind of going, really sorry about this. But that's life.
Yeah.
You know, these things happen. Doorbells ring, emails pop up. Your phone that you were convinced you put on silent will start buzzing somewhere.
Yeah.
That's life. And in a lot of jobs, they are looking to see how you cope when things don't go smoothly. Can you cope with these issues? Can you bring it back? Are you going to fall apart if something unexpected happens? Or can you go, apologies for that, let's get back on track?
Yeah, that makes
How you
sense.
cope with these unknown scenarios is quite often a big deal in whatever type of role it is.
I agree. And interviewers typically ask about if you have any weaknesses, don't they? It's number one. We are taught some cheesy things to say when we're in a careers class. You know, I'm a perfectionist, like, you know. How would you respond to that question, firstly? And do you have any tips for someone who maybe would face that question going forward?
Like with everything, it's honesty.
Yeah.
If a cheesy response isn't you, don't use one. You've got to be authentically you.
Yeah.
Everyone hates the weaknesses question, but have a think about it beforehand. What are your set weaknesses? Having that awareness of what you're not as strong as, the awareness is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because if you're aware of it, you will either be working on it.
Yeah.
It's an area for personal growth that you're already looking at, or you might have found a workaround.
Yeah. So,
you know, for me personally, my weaknesses, as I'm sure people who work with me will understand, is I'm a little bit of a control freak.
A wee bit, Sinead.
A little bit. Yeah, I like to know what's going on. Yeah. It's not that I don't trust my team, but I want to be there to help and support them.
I would say we're healthily nosy.
Yes. You know, and I will totally own the fact that I'm nosy. You know, I've got colleagues that call me Miss Marple, and if I find a nugget of information, I will go off and research it.
Yeah.
So I know I'm going to be open about the fact that, yes, I like to research. I like to know what's going on. And yeah, I might go down rabbit holes with information, but quite often I'm finding out useful things through that.
Of course.
Whether or not it's a new interview technique I'd never heard about, or it's a new podcast, or, you know, recruiters sharing their skills and experience. Yes, that might not be useful for me there on that day, but couple of months down the line, it might be you know what you could look up? I remember discovering this.
Yeah.
I might get a little bit distracted at time going down these different avenues, being fundamentally nosy, but have I learned something overall? And then that's information that I can share with my colleagues, with candidates, and it's just something that I own.
Yeah.
It is a flaw of mine. Some people see it as a flaw, but for me, I've learned to harness that and go, how can this benefit me?
100%. And I think, it is harnessing your own weaknesses. I am quite sensitive, and I definitely put a lot of pressure on myself at work. I know that shows I care, but sometimes it's difficult to describe that, isn't it? You know, and if things go wrong, I do tend to blame myself. But then on the other end of that, I find that I am quite an uplifting team member. I would never be so hard on my colleagues in the same way that I am to myself. So I think that is almost a strength and a weakness sometimes, but it's finding out the things that you maybe aren't that good at, or maybe that is your weaknesses, but then seeing how that does apply. So are you hard on yourself? Yes, that means you care. Yeah. Are you a little bit nosy? That means you're inquisitive. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's all about finding the strength.
Definitely.
And what should we definitely not underline not to hit in an interview setting?
Personal hygiene.
Okay.
For me,
is a big one.
It's a big one. Yeah. You know, plan ahead and take care of things before you arrive.
Yeah.
For me as well, show that you've done your research. Don't turn up and go, oh, sorry, who are you?
Yeah.
There are better ways to answer questions. Don't read. Yes, notes are fine. Do not come with a script.
Yeah.
Because immediately you're going to lose your personality. You're going to lose eye contact because you're too busy focusing on the bit of paper. You won't be able to adapt. You will try to be shoehorning what you've pre-prepared into what they're asking you. And quite often, that's going to take you off on a tangent. If somebody asks you a specific question and go, oh, I've not got an answer for that, because you've written out every answer, then you can't adapt.
Yeah,
Have some loose preparation. Don't go in too heavily scripted.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's good advice. And also, don't be entitled. Be a nice person. We talked about it
Yeah.
a lot. I think that is definitely the biggest do not.
Yes.
And we had touched on it briefly, but what do you think is a good question to ask the interview at the end? Something I used to like to ask was, what does day one look like? What
Yep.
will 6 months look like? What will year one look like? Those sorts of things.
Yep.
Because I think that shows that you do want to stay for a long time and you want to grow within that company. But
Yep.
have you heard anything from a client maybe that they liked, or is there something that you like to hear at the end of an interview?
For me, it's all about balance. I think you've got to have the humility, and you don't want to go, oh, so when I start, what will happen? You know, you're still at an interview stage. It's not, if you go in there like you've already got the job, that can get people's backs up.
Yeah.
It's, you know, what's the potential here? If you are looking for career progression, sometimes if you mention that too early, it can put somebody off because you're not interviewing for
The next
the next job.
next step. Yeah.
They're interviewing you for this position. They don't want to think that you're just being there for a couple of months and then you'll want to move up. Remember what you're going forward for. So it's all about balance.
Yeah.
It's typically speaking, are people here for a couple of years before they move up? Ask them what the typical timeline is if you are looking for progression.
What steps can I take to reach the next step? Those sorts of things. You want to know that show that you want to work for it and that you're not expecting.
Exactly. But it's got to be in a timely manner.
Yeah.
You know, it's finding out if you've been able to find out about your interviewers beforehand, like you mentioned before, doing a bit of research. Is there anything you can bring up about them? Go, oh, I can see that you've been with this business for 6 years. What's kept you here so long? Why do you like it?
I like that. I think that's a simple one to do. Yeah, what's kept you here for so long?
Yeah.
That's a good one. We've come to the end of the interview. I think it's now time to switch roles. So I would love you to interview me for the job of podcast host.
All right.
So what sort of questions would you ask?
For me, it'd be things like, what qualities do you think that you're going to bring towards this role that's going to make you successful?
So I would say that I am really humble and down to earth, but I'm also charming and devilishly handsome, and that would get me the job.
Absolutely. And how are you going to prove that to me using those steps?
Yeah. So those are the sort of things that we need to think about. That's all. Before I let you go, what is the best way to get into the correct frame of mind for an interview?
It's all about preparation. Know where you've got to be, what's expected of you. Because if you turn up prepared, you've given yourself the best chance. You know, invest that time, make sure that it's right for you. If this is going to be your job, that's going to be a lot of your time.
Yeah.
You know, on average, people are working 37 hours per week. That's a lot of your time per week. The only thing you do more than work is sleep.
Yeah.
So this is going to take up a large portion of your life. Make sure it's going to be right for you. Give it that kind of respect when you're looking into it, going, am I going to be happy doing this day in, day out for however long this role lasts for?
Yeah.
If that is something that you're happy with and you'll want to go forward for this interview, then spend a bit of time researching it. Think about yourself. Think about what they're going to ask of you. And just go in so you can highlight who you are and how great you're going to be in that role.
Great. Where can listeners follow you or follow Brook Street? And if we are in the market for a new role and we, like we recommended, want to work with a recruitment consultant like yourself or one of your team, Sinead, where can we hear more about Brook Street?
So Brook Street, we've got web pages, we're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. There's so many different social options for you. Obviously, you can find myself on LinkedIn, Sinead Randall. It's a more unusual name. It makes me quite easy to spot. But no, it's all about get in touch, let us know what you're looking for, what your situation is, and then you can either arrange to come into branch, have a phone call, have a Teams call. There will be somebody who can get in touch with you, talk through what you're looking for, and then we can help and support you. For me, if I lose a candidate to another job, I don't mind that. I would rather know that I've helped somebody find their right job.
And that's the end of today's episode. I just want to say a huge thank you to Sinead for joining us today and for sharing her advice on a successful job interview. And remember, if you're in the market for a new role, why not check out Brook Street online? There may just be a dream job waiting there for you. Please don't forget to share the podcast with your friends or a colleague, and subscribe and give feedback wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.